Hi, I'm Paul Musa for JamPlay.com. In this lesson, we're going to look at bass line construction and theory for walking bass lines and chords. The fundamental rule to creating a good bass line is to remember that whenever the chord change occurs, you must hit the root note on beat 1. Whenever the chord change occurs, hit the root note on beat 1. Now, what this means is that if you have two measures of a chord, you don't have to play the root note at the beginning of the second measure. It's only when the chord change occurs. So if you had two measures of E minor, you could play the root note on one and do whatever you wanted to do, well, within parameters. We're going to talk about those parameters, but you could play all these different things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. That wasn't the root note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Completely fine. If there was a chord change that happened on the second bar, then you have to hit that root note to the next chord on beat 1. Now, some advanced bass players might get away with playing the third on beat 1 or the fifth on beat 1, and that's down the road. That's a little bit more evolved bass playing. But for now, if you can just follow this basic rule that you have to play the bass note whenever on beat 1, whenever the chord change occurs, you're going to be in great shape. All rules are meant to be broken, but for now, we're just going to stay with this rule, okay? So back to my little 1 bar, 2 bar kind of thing. So if you have the next measure being A7 or A minor, you would have to 1 root note on beat 1 for the A7 chord, right? You'd have to do that. It just makes so much more sense. Now, jumping ahead a little bit, if you have 4 chords all spread out between 2 beats, so in other words, 2 chords per measure, it becomes very simple because you're playing the root note, and then we're going to talk about approach tones, but you're going to play root note, root note, root note, root note. You hear this a lot in like I've Got Rhythm, that kind of a thing, rhythm changes. That kind of stuff sounds really complicated, but in fact it's really easy. And that's actually, theoretically, it's easier to figure out a bass line for that than it is for when you have a chord that goes on for 2 measures. Because you have to think a little bit more about the context of the other notes you're going to pick besides the root note. We're going to get to this in a second. So the bass note must happen on beat 1 when the chord change occurs. Now, the second most important beat, and we're talking about 4/4 here, walking bass, right? The second most important beat is beat 4. Because beat 4 is where the approach tone is going to happen. That's the beat before the next measure is going to happen, before the next chord is going to happen. So we have 2 options. You can do a whole step or a half step approach tone to the next chord. So you have to think ahead a little bit. So let's make it simple. Let's think about E minor to A minor. That seems to be the progression we're going to use for this series. So E minor to A minor. Okay, so what I'm going to do is look at a whole step above A minor on beat 4 of the E minor measure. This shouldn't be that complicated, but just listen. 1, 2, 3, whole step above B to the A. So the bass line is just going 2, 3, 4, 1. The approach tone is on the 4th beat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay? Now, you can also do a whole step below the A minor. Listen to this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. It's kind of a little bit out of the way down to the G, but it sounds cool still. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Now, we can also go back to the E minor. So let's do a whole step below E minor, and let's do a whole step above A minor. So we're going to go a whole step above A minor, and then a whole step below E minor. Listen to this. All of a sudden, we're starting to get the beginnings, the skeleton, as I call it, of a bass line. If you can get that skeleton, the rest of it's a piece of cake. So if you can get that bass note whenever the chord change is occurring on beat 1 and then the approach tone on 4, you're in good shape. So the next kind of approach tone is the half step. Now the beauty of the half step is it can be used for any chord in any situation, regardless of the chord type. So let's do a half step above A minor. And let's do a half step below E minor. Just for fun, let's do a half step below A minor. And a half step above E minor. They start to become these interesting little variations. So once again, here's a half step above A minor, half step below E minor. Let me do a half step below A minor again, a half step above E minor. And you could do a half step above both time, it doesn't matter. I was just trying to make it to where the line was a little bit closer. So the half step in some ways sounds a little bit more interesting. There's a little more tension because it's half step away like a leading tone, but it always works. Now the whole step, there's a rule that you need to know about the whole step. The whole step approach tone, you have to be aware of the chord type that you're going to. So if you're going to a minor 7 chord, the whole step above or below works. If you're going to a minor 7 chord, whole step always works. Dominant 7 chord, whole step above or below always works. Major 7 chord, whole step below doesn't sound so good. Half step below works. Whole step above works. So the rule with the major 7 chord is that you can use a whole step above approach tone and a half step below, but you cannot use a whole step below. So what I'm going to do is just play a quick example so you can hear that whole step below, how it doesn't sound right. I'm going to go D major to A major, D major 7 to A major 7. It's kind of strange. Listen to the half step. Sounds much better. Here's the whole step above. Sounds great too. The whole step below, be careful. Some people use it, some people get away with it, it sounds okay, but for the most part, stick to these rules and you'll be in good shape for all of the progressions. So at this point, we're only dealing with 2 beats that we're playing a bass note in the measure. And you might think, well, this isn't that useful, but in fact it is. Many bass players do what we call walking in 2 or 2 feel. And a 2 feel is an interesting thing. It's just what it sounds like. It's 2 beats in the measure. And most of the time, bass players will do the 2 feel during the melody of the jazz standard, and then they'll start walking during the solos, and it creates this beautiful momentum that kind of happens to where you hear 1, 3, 1, 3, and then during the solos you hear 1, 2. All of a sudden there's this incredible kind of forward movement, okay? So the 2 feel, this information that I'm giving you, all these theoretical concepts about building the bass line and the approach tones, the 2 feel, that becomes essential. So you can actually almost create a 2 feel sort of line with just these 2 notes. So I'm adding a few notes, but it's real sparse. So those things still are very musical and very useful, and I'm not playing bass notes on every beat. So the second and third beats when you're doing a bass line, like I said, they're not as important as the first and the fourth. They're still important, but once you have that skeleton of the bass note and the approach tone, then it becomes very simple. So these are the 2 options in a very simple theoretical scale. The 2 options are either you can do scale degrees or chord tones. Now, chord tones are simply arpeggios. So you can either do notes from the arpeggio or you can do notes from the scale. So let's take something very simple. I'm going to take an E minor 7 once again, E minor 7 to A minor 7. And I think let's do the whole step above approach tone to the A minor and the whole step below. So it's just kind of real compact within like a little box. See that? Right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay. Now, what are we going to do with the second and third beats? So if we use chord tones, it's going to sound something like this. Right, 1, 2, 3. So I'm doing like the E, G, B, right? So I'm doing chord tones, just an E minor arpeggio. Listen to this. sudden that sounds like a pretty good bass line. Now, let's do the same thing on the A minor. 1, 3, 5, approach tone. So see how we're dividing everything. We have root note on 1, approach tone on 4, and then we have chord tones on 2 and 3. So that's kind of a good sounding bass line. The problem is, not that it's a problem, but there might be too many leaps, too many arpeggios, too much space. So then the next option becomes scale degrees. So, okay, what does that mean? Well, let's think about it. This progression, E minor to A minor, it's probably in the key of E minor. This is probably a 1 to 4 in the key of E minor. If you don't understand that, don't worry about that. The other thing about this series is, I'm going to go through note by note, measure by measure. So if a lot of this theory stuff is confusing to you, don't stress about it. Eventually you'll learn all of it, but it's good to know how to do the bass line in addition to just learning the cool bass line. So back to the theory of this one. So scale-wise, what are we going to do on beats 2 and 3? Okay, so if we're in the key of E minor, we've got 1 sharp, which is F sharp. So you can play anything in that key and it should sound pretty good. So check this out. 1, 2, 3. Why not that? So I picked E, F sharp, G. So on beats 2 and 3, I'm playing F sharp and G, which are both in the key of E minor. So approach tone. And then on the A minor, I'm just going to go A, B, C. That's in the key too. So these are just simple notes that are in the key of E minor. And it works pretty good. See how that works? And notice again, just to reiterate, I'm using the staccato upper chord. Staccato. 1, 2, 3. Right. You can use legato if you want. Sounds okay. Both work fine. So the trick becomes finding what notes work on the second and third beats, and your two options, like I said, once again, they are chord tones or scale degrees. So let's just go ahead and do some exercises. This first exercise, I'm going to use a G minor 7 E type to a C minor 7 A type, right? You know, by the way, a lot of jazz guys call these our drop 2 chords, because someday we'll get into that series, but that's kind of what they are, but E shape to A shape kind of chords. This first one, what we're going to do is, the bass line is just root, 3, 5, and then I used a half step approach tone above to the C minor, and then I did scale degree, and then half step above. So I'll just play this one kind of slow. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're probably watching my right hand and kind of wondering a few things. I have a tendency to just find out, do you use whatever makes sense as far as economy and ease? And what I was doing was 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 4. I used 1 a lot. You could use 2 though. 1, 3, 4, 2. For some reason, I don't know, I like that to use my index finger and slide around a little bit. It has like gravity or something, but you don't have to do that. This next little exercise, really similar to the first one, we're going to use the G minor and the C minor. And this one, what we're going to do is do scale degree, and then half step below C minor, scale degree, half step below G minor. This is a really cool sounding one. Great sounding line, right? So also you notice that I'm playing around a little bit with the the staccato element, and that's something that you, like I've mentioned before, you can play around with. You might try legato now and then. You can also do little things, and we'll get into this, just want to touch on it. You can do little things like, instead of playing the comping section on just the and of one, which keeps it simple, but if you start to get bored with that, play one and. That's something like that would sound like this. Just to change it up and make it simple. Remember that the comping part has to be very basic. Don't do extra beats and extra, complicated rhythms. That never works. Comping in itself in jazz does not use ridiculously complicated rhythms or many rhythms per measure. It's usually a couple of rhythms just to make it interesting and placed in the right place. I hope you learned a lot in this lesson. A couple of things to keep in mind are what notes you choose for the second and third beats. Be aware of the key that you're in. Be aware of the mode. Be aware of the arpeggio. Arpeggios are simple things to learn. If you don't understand theory and you don't know scales, just play arpeggios. Arpeggios are very simple. If this is a little bit confusing, then just use your ear. Your ear will always tell you what's right and wrong. So join me in the next lesson. What we're going to be doing is actually playing an entire piece, an E minor blues progression from beginning to end, and it's something I think you'll really enjoy.